Hello and welcome back to Dev Game Club, a weekly podcast in which two veteran game developers look at games from the past to talk about their impact and relevance today. I'm Tim Longo Jr., and I'm joined, as always, by a man who has a hard time deciding between a proximity mine, a rocket launcher, or a good old-fashioned slap.
Brett Duville. Yes, I do have a hard time determining which of those I want to use. I'm a big fan of a slap, I have to say, if my enemy is not kneeling near me, because then it gets a little trickier. It's a little gadier then. Anyway, we're not talking about multiplayer this week. We'll be doing that next week. Tonight, we're actually very happy to have a guest in studio who got his start in games by joining Rare in 1996, both as a performer and an adapter of some prior art from the Donkey Kong series. He quickly jumped into composition for the studio, however, joining with Graham Norgate to compose music for GoldenEye 007 in 1997, including that absolutely killer pause music, and following with work for Rare on the Banjo-Kazooie series, Donkey Kong, Perfect Dark, and many of their titles up through the Xbox 360 era with the Viva Pinata games. His work on games such as Kingdoms of Amalur Reckoning, Civilization Beyond Earth, and the Mario & Rabbids series have been nominated for numerous composition awards, including picking up Best Original Score for Video Game from the International Film Music Critics Association and a Best Video Game Score at the Q Awards. He has a wide variety across multiple types and styles of games, has performed guitar for others, has composed for film as well, including a People's Vote Award at the World Soundtrack Awards for the feature film The King's Daughter, which saw him coming full circle to score another property featuring Pierce Brosnan, this time as the King of France, Louis XIV. Not only that, but he has voiced that great ape Donkey Kong as well as various other voices, especially in the Banjo-Kazooie franchise. Please welcome to the cast this evening one of Edinburgh's favorite sons, Grant Kirkhope. Welcome to the show, Grant.
You can't say Edinburgh, it's Edinburgh.
Edinburgh. See, I can't. I was gonna do it in the voice, and then I'm like, I'm gonna mess it up.
You can't say it. You just can't say that. It's just not possible.
Can I? Can I say it?
Yeah, can you? But, no, also, 1995 I started at Rare.
95. Okay.
Yeah,
my
just like
mistake.
October it was. Yes, and that's when I first started there. Yes, at the grand old age of whatever I was. But yes, many moons ago.
Yes. Welcome.
I'm
already
dying
got
to know.
Two good corrections off the bat, which is great.
Yes, my pronunciation. Yeah, you should hear me do. I do one for Australia too, right, Melbourne? And I try to get that one right, and I'm never quite.
I wouldn't even. Yeah,
let's not do that. I want to ask a question first because usually Tim drives these, and my question is like, what the heck is it like composing for such a limited palette as the Nintendo 64? Because that's where you got your start. I mean, everything since then has gotten bigger and bigger and bigger and more and more. But like, what was it like working with? I mean, Nintendo systems are often ahead of the other machines of the same generation with the audio things that they do. They always invest in it. But I'm really curious, like, there's so much music in that game. A lot of it's, fairly short and repeats and things like that. But there's a lot of music with a lot of variety. What is that like on that system?
Well, I guess, when I first got there, actually my first job at Rare was I was converting Dave Wise's Donkey Kong Country 2, Diddy Kong's Quest from the SNES to work on the original Game Boy. So I'd been sat at home in my bedroom, writing music to try and get a job with a proper synthesizer and, Cubase and all the rest of it. And so when I got to Rare and I was told I was doing the Game Boy first, I was like, ooh, that doesn't sound very good. And then Dave Wise quickly showed me how to work it. And it was like, it was all in hex, right? So there was no MIDI files, no nothing. It was like just four numbers, the first two numbers of the note and the second two numbers of the length. And you just wrote columns of numbers and, and subclauses, subroutines and all that stuff, which was like, to me, it was like programming. I was like, I just thought, I'm never going to be able to do this. So I actually said, I'm going to have to quit. So I said to my friend over there, Robin, I said, Robin Beeland, who got the job there first before I did. So I'm going to have to quit, Robin. I just can't do it. It's too hard. He says, don't be stupid. He says, get Dave back tomorrow and get him to show you again. So I wrote each step down. So I managed that in the end. But about halfway through doing that, Graham Norgate, who was doing GoldenEye, he was also doing Blast Corps and that Ken Griffey baseball on the SNES, I think.
Sure,
yeah. He said, I'm really busy on that. Can you take over GoldenEye? And I was like, you're joking. Fantastic. Yeah. So little did I know what that entailed. I didn't really know what it was going to be like. And so that was equally, like you say, very limited on what you can do. I think we had 1 megabit for all the sound effects and all the music.
Oh man!
So it was only an 8 megabit cartridge, so it was tiny. So like you do that thing where you got to make it your own little MIDI set of instruments that you're going to use in the game. So if you want to use a clarinet, for instance, like you could sample one note only. Like, on these big libraries, it's easy to sample every note. Multiple velocity. It's everywhere. It's different. Like you got that full whatever a human could do, right? But then you could sample one note on the clarinet, and that had to cover the entire range of the whole clarinet. So obviously, the lower it got was more whoa, 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 and the higher it got was like more Mickey Mouse, right? So it sounded pretty dreadful, apart from like 2 or 3 notes either side of it. And so some of the things, so you had to kind of work out what sounded good where, and only use it in that tiny context. And also we had to, because it was so tiny memory, we had to actually compress the MIDI files, which MIDI files are like what, few kilobytes, if that.
Right, tiny.
Yeah. Tiny. So, but like you did a drum pattern, like that one that goes do 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 do, my faith the more beat for the frigate, right? Because that drum pattern repeated through the entire tune, and I had to take one bar of it and put a loop mark at either side of it in the MIDI file, so that there's only that bit of note information, so it saved all the other bars of note information, which is like just bytes, right, or bits.
Right.
Yeah. Holy cow!
So we had to like that, like things like cymbals. You got a really long decay, like and a cymbal. It goes for a long time, right? So we couldn't afford to have the decay, so we had to loop the cymbal, which is awful. So you'd get the attack, and then somewhere on the down you'd put in 2 loop points. It would go like that. So you go, and then you put an envelope on it, so you go.
Amazing.
Amazing. Oh, no.
It just sounds, and to get the kind of I played guitar for the main theme, in GoldenEye, and to get that amount of sample in the machine was like, we're never going to be able to manage it. So Graham kind of worked out that you could sort of play the entire Bond theme with 2 or 3 or 4 bits, like da 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 da. And you can make the whole theme out of just those bits, shuffle them out in different orders. It wasn't like one whole phrase; it was like the bits that you can make it out of those 4 or 5 bits. So
it really is. It's so. I mean, it is like programming to me. Yeah. I mean, I hear that and I'm like thinking, you have such a limited. We always work in games with limitations, always, right? I mean, even. Regardless of what it is, the biggest budget game, it still has limits.
Yeah.
And they've gotten bigger and bigger over time, and we have to sort of impose our own constraints. But the amazing thing to me is to think, like, I remember trying to squeeze, 10K of memory out of something, or 20K of memory, and you're like squeezing out 20 bits just to get this thing to fit on this cart, which I've been joking that, like, that GoldenEye fits in the space that like Notepad fits in the executable and Windows these days. I mean, it's like it's that kind of level of difference. So well done, sir.
I know, like it's really when you think back to it, you think how do and also the fact that people still want to listen to it to this day is the sonic quality is not great, and like also nothing is CD quality, so we had to resample everything from 44.1 kilohertz down to like 16 kilohertz or maybe even 11 kilohertz, to get the instrument small enough so it would fit in. I think the cymbals were the biggest or the highest sample thing, and they were probably 16 kilohertz probably. And that's it's a quarter of CD quality. So we had to like do that, and then we had to add lots and lots of high-end EQ to try and get rid of some of the muddiness in them and get it to sound a bit better. So the fact that anybody wants to hear it these days is beyond me, really. It's crazy how poor the actual sound quality really is. But I guess I do say that sometimes a lot of the guys that I know back in those days, they know how to write a good tune, right? Because I feel like you've only got, that's all you can do is write a decent tune, a decent set of chords, and hope for the best. Like these days, you can put one thing on a synthesizer, you get this great massive sound of all stuff going on. We didn't have that. We had to try and write a good tune and a decent set of chords to try and make it half good, not even like, So I do think that it's a great, I hate that phrase out of the box, but it does make you think about stuff, how you do things. You have to think about, how can I use this sound? It sounds awful here, but it sounds okay here, but it sounds shit there. You think, well, how am I can use that there and that one can go there. So, that kind of thing. So it was a big balance in that to try and get it to sound even half decent.
Amazing. Constraints, right? Like constraints or foster creativity. Yeah.
Yeah, totally.
Well, not to take a step back, but one of the things that we do like, I mean, you kind of hit on a little bit, but as you were before you joined Rare, like what how did Grant's journey get you to that point? And you mentioned a friend that you sounded like you had there, and kind of, this was 95. So were you in the musician world? Were you into games? Like what, a little bit, kind of like paint the picture of the era. Because one of the things we like to do in the podcast is we try to put ourselves back in that time, right? Like why did this game come to pass at this point? What was its influence? Brett and I were both, I had just started, let's see. Yeah. We were both officially developers at that point, but new, right? I mean, Brett was already programming and I was early in design. So we didn't really know what we were doing fully, but trying to put yourself back in that space for the audience, so we know kind of what was going through Grant's head at that time.
I was just glad to have a job, really. That's what the main issue, really, I think. Because I went through school as normal. I went to university in the Royal College of Music in Manchester and did 4 years of classical. I'm a classically trained trumpet player, right? So I did a proper music degree. But I'm kind of self-taught metal guitar player from about 12. So I did all that, and then I finished university, and I didn't want to be a trumpet player particularly. And I just sort of started playing in lots of bands, really, local bands that I played for, like some metal bands. I was in like a soul funk band on trumpet for like 7 or 8 years, and that was a kind of proper working band. We did like 3-4 nights a week, everywhere, quite a bit of Europe, all over the UK, all the universities. We did quite a big sort of student band. And the biggest band I played for was called Little Angels, who were a big UK rock band. I was playing the trumpet for them in the horn section. And they did they did a #1 album, stuff like that. They were pretty big in the UK, and we did some sort of giant tours with them. We did, we opened up for Bon Jovi on a 6-week European tour, playing the football stadiums.
Wow.
It was like 90,000 people. It was incredible, and it was us and Billy Idol and Bon Jovi. We did a big Van Halen tour, so I got to know Eddie Van Halen pretty well, and he gave me a guitar, which is amazing. And
wow.
He was super nice. We did the Brad Adams tour, and Brad Adams had that single from Robin Hood film that was #1 for weeks and weeks and weeks. And we did like 6 or 7 football stadiums in the UK. The old Wembley Stadium sold out like 77,000. I mean, it was just proper rock and roll, And that went on for really about 11 years. So from 22 until 33, I spent playing in rock bands, on and off unemployment insurance in between times, still living at home with my mother till I was 33, which is, not very good. But, I was loving the rock and roll stuff. It was great fun, but it just finally came to an end. And I was back playing in covers bands in my local pubs for like, $40 a night kind of thing.
Yeah.
Right. And then my mate, Robin Beanland, he played he was a keyboard player in one of the local bands that I played for. He sort of got a job, and no one that I knew got a job. We were all just in bands on unemployment half the time, and that's what we did. That's what I thought I'd do forever and be a tramp eventually, And so he just said, "Yeah, I'm going to work for a company called Rare." I was like, "Never heard of him." He said, "Yeah, I'm off." So off he went. I couldn't believe it. So he'd been there about a year and a half. He said, "Grant, you've been off and on unemployment, for about 11 years, which I had." He said, "Don't you think you should get a job?" I was like, "Well, what can I do?" He said, "Well, why don't you try do what I do, write music for video games?" So I thought, well, I can have a go. I played a lot of games at the time, So I recommended a bit of gear. I bought like a copy of Cubase and a synthesizer, and an Atari ST with a Mega RAM, because that was you had to need a Mega RAM to run Cubase, and sat in my bed.
Amazing.
I know, that's crazy, right? I sat in my bed.
ST, yeah.
It's amazing. So sat in my bedroom for like 1994 writing music that I thought was appropriate for video games, and I wrote, I sent Rare 5 cassette tapes over the course of that Over the course of that year, I never got a reply. And then out of the blue, I got a letter saying, "Please come for an interview." And it said, "Can you please write a Batman-style orchestral piece, a Mario platform piece, and a fighting game guitar-based piece?" Because they were doing Killer Instinct at the time, right?
Yeah, Killer Instinct.
You could use a guitar player. So I did that quickly. Went down to interview Dave Wise, superhero. He interviewed me with Simon Farmer, who was a general manager. And would you believe it? I got the job. So, I was I'd spent all that time living with my mother, thinking I'm never going to move out of here. And then eventually I got the bloody job and I had to go and live somewhere else. So, yeah, it was, and also if Robin had never done it, I would never have done it. It was absolute fluke. And also when I was at university, I was terrible at composition. I failed the exam 3 years out of 4. I was so bad at composing. I never once thought about being a composer. Not once in my mind. I wrote songs for the metal bands I was in now and then, but never once thought about being a proper bona fide composer. So how I do it, really, I don't really know. But as I say, I was crap at it. Failed it. My teacher was pulling his hair out, going, Grant, you just why can't you understand it? It's not that hard. I just couldn't do it. So got the job, and there you go. Couldn't believe it.
Amazing. So what was This is our first Rare game, right, Brett, that we've played?
Yes.
Yeah. So I think, as our first Rare guest, not to put too much pressure on you, like, I think the other thing we like to do is talk about, such an influential studio at the time. Like,
Right.
you come in, you're like, amazing, I have a job, I did it. I'm out of the basement.
Look at me,
whatever.
Ma.
Yeah, exactly. And then you get to the studio, which, as you mentioned, you hadn't heard of, but you were a gamer, it sounds like. What was Rare like back in those days? Like, was it, coming in and they're like welcoming, and it's just kind of, everyone's like early days of game development, in their mind? Like, what, Rare, especially Rare, because it's such a famous and and beloved studio, especially back in that era. Like, what was it like coming into your first game studio?
Well, I thought it was just like Disneyland. I couldn't believe it. I mean, Rare was it's based in a place called Twycross, which is the tiniest village. It's only really got a pub and a private school and a tractor warehouse that fixes tractors. That's it. That's all that's there. The rest of it's just all fields, right? This old manor farmhouse that Tim and Chris Stamper had bought at some point. Because before Rare, they were ultimately playing the game, right? So they'd done a lot of games on the Spectrum, so they made a lot of money on the Spectrum days. And then, when it got to its height, they decided to quit doing that and went, reverse engineered an NES. Nintendo, I'd never didn't know anyone did it before. And they did that, made a game for it, and said, look what we've done. They couldn't believe it. Nintendo were just shocked that anybody could even do it. So that started off then on the NES, and then it switched to the Super NES, of course, and so it became Rare from that point. But I mean, it was already I joined just after the big Donkey Kong Country thing had happened, so it sold 10 million copies, and it was a revelation to everybody that they used the SGI graphics and managed to get to it, all that stuff, and
right.
It made the news in the UK because Nintendo then had bought 49% of the company. I was unheard of for Nintendo to buy somebody outside of Japan, because they were so impressed with what Rare had done. So when I got there was like quite a lot of fancy cars in the car park, It was a very small, like old manor farmhouse, and it slowly turned all the outbuildings, like the stables and bits and pieces, into dev blocks, right? So it was a main kind of old country house that kind of housed the admin stuff, and then there was like a bit of a canteen because it was the middle of nowhere. You couldn't get food anywhere. It was this little tiny, like a small cafe thing that was part of the build. That was all joined to the buildings, and then they had like other blocks. We called them stables, and each team had its own stable. So there's a Killer Instinct block when I got there. There was a music block, but I couldn't go in there because it's already full of Dave and Graham and Robin and Evelyn. So I got put in the old chicken shed that had been converted into an office.
Come on, you're making this up.
That's the truth. It was the old chicken shed that I was put in there, and then the other blocks slowly got converted as I was there. But I never made it to the music block because there was never a space because there was other composers there. So I was in the chicken shed for a while, and then. I know it's crazy, really. And Tim and Chris were the brothers who ran it. Stephen Stamper, the brother, ran the grounds. Carol Stamper, Tim's wife, was one of the admin people. Louise Stamper, the sister, was one of the admin people. Tim and Chris's mum, Beryl and John, did all the kind of the cafe bit and the food stuff, and it was all a big man. Carol's dad, he was part of the admin too, and it was all a big, massive family concern. So and they'd done so well, and they'd made such a lot of money off from the Spectrum days, and then when Donkey Kong came out, they did it again. I mean, they just absolutely, whatever Tim and Chris seemed to touch, it just turned to gold. I loved working for those two.
Yeah.
And so, as I say, getting put in the game, I was like, well, I'm not that keen, but bloody hell, I can't believe I'm actually here. And then I did it I got there in October, and I think by maybe November they said, look, Graham's got busy, can you take him a GoldenEye? So I was told I could do the GameBoy in the morning and GoldenEye in the afternoon.
In the chicken shed.
That's right, in the chicken shed. And the heating didn't quite work as well. It was a bit weird. It used to not work in there, so it could get cold in the winter.
That's a whole new meaning to garage shop, game development, right? Amazing.
And all the blocks, all the stables had coded keys, right? So you could only get into the stable that you were working on. So none of the dev guys could go and see what other dev guys were doing. Everyone made their own engines. Like you'd think with a company, you'd have one engine for the entire company, but every team built their own engine. The Banjo-Kazooie engine, the Conquer engine, the Killer Instinct engine, the GoldenEye, all different, made by those 15 people in those stables.
Wow.
So as a musician, usually because you'd worked on different games, you'd get your key would get into a lot of places, but everybody else got stuck with just one stable. They couldn't get anywhere else because it was coded. like that. Because I like to keep the kind of team separate, so there's kind of a bit of a friendly rivalry. So you could, they'd show it at some point and they would go, oh, wow, my God, and it inspire you to do better, So it's a bit like
Interesting.
that.
Wow, that's that's just such a crazy to think about it that way. We're just, I don't know. I've worked in mostly, corporate jobs throughout my game development. It's, the traditional offices and all of that kind of stuff. But it's so fascinating to hear like such the polar opposite. And I had always heard rumors because I was at Microsoft for a while and Rare was a sister studio and stuff. And I never got to go over and visit there, but I'd always heard, it's like, it's out in the middle of this field and it's this tiny town.
It totally is.
And it's still that way.
Yeah. So after a while, when they were still part-owned by Nintendo before Microsoft bought the company, we moved about a mile down the road to this sort of bigger, this gigantic fields thing. It was just, even more fields, but they made a custom-built building. So I remember that, because Tim and Chris were like really hyper about security, we all had to move our own gear down the road and put it into the new building. So we all had to drive the vans. We all, as a whole company, did it all together, packed all the gear up, sealed all the boxes with these, super security tags so they couldn't be opened. Only got a mile down the road. It wasn't like it was going to get stolen. They were really conscious about that. So we all moved into the new building, which was like pretty flashy. And that was it's still based as a main building with like, we called them the barns this time, which were like these kind of 2 office space deep, sort of long, narrow buildings like stables. And there was like 5 of those that came out from the main building, or 4 or 5. And you just, the bottom floor was a game and the top floor was a different game. It was like that. And so it's still a bit like the same kind of stable kind of thing.
It kept the feel, yeah.
And
still one pub down the street.
Well, I remember when I went to that, but it's a bit rough. No one went there, but it was like, it was. I sometimes think it was a ploy to make sure everybody stayed late working because there's nothing else to do. So, and they provided everything as provided for you. No extra charge. So, but I guess in those days, and I was older than everybody else because I was like 33. They were all like, 20s, early 20s, so no one had wives, so they're like, just stay here and work. I've got nothing to go home for,
That old chestnut.
Did you similarly have sort of a rivalry between the musicians who were working there? There's quite a lot, of quite a number of people working on the music there. Did you also kind of compete in that way? It sounds like you were in your own shed compared to the rest of them. Maybe you were the one who was out there, competing to try to get a spot in the main shed or main stable. But did you have a sort of similar sort of vibe with that, or was that different? Because you're kind of in a support, role. I'm curious.
I think we all, I think the whole company was built a bit on that, but not in a bad way. It was
sure.
It was a friendly rivalry. So it's always cool to see people do different things because you'd think about have an idea. And the next person would go, well, that's a good idea. I could probably build on that. So it would go round and round and round, kind of thing. So I feel like that happened quite a lot. Like I remember doing, when before Banjo-Kazooie, the game was called Dream, right? It was just on the SNES. And it switched from the SNES to the N64. And it was kind of the boss's game. And I was on that with Dave Wise for a while. Mm-hmm. And then it switched to Banjo-Kazooie because this Dream was like this big kind of open world RPG, a bit like a Zelda type thing. We had this very elaborate system with a floor where you can make the polygons into any shape at all and build these great massive landscapes. It was amazing, but the N64 couldn't really run it very well. So it wasn't powerful enough. So we had a real problem with that. And then then it was called Conker's 12 Tales, I think it was, before it became Conker's Bad Fur Day. And they'd gone down the kind of Mario 64 route with these big polygons all over the place. So you can make landscapes out of that and a big floor polygons. It didn't take up a lot of processing power. And I remember we all got marched across because our game wasn't doing great, wasn't going very well as Banjo. And we got marched across to see the game. They had a really fantastic first level and a windmill and lightning strikes and conkers all over the place. It was completely fantastic. We were so depressed that they'd done so well. And so we kind of went, right, that's it. Let's dump in the floor system. We're going to make a complete platform, and we just switched Banjo-Kazooie to a platform rather than a big RPG. So because we saw Conker how good it was, we kind of took the system, how they did it, and made the levels like that. So and then Conker they went slow. We overtook them, and a bit like that. Yes, we saw the other stuff. Like you would see it eventually. We'd have the killer instinct arcade machine there, so we'd all be playing it. Kind of things like that. And Robin had because he was doing the music for Killer Instinct. He had the Mortal Kombat arcade machine in his office, so he could run the audio straight through it, so he could hear what it sounded like in the cabinet. So you would test it out like that, right? So and of course, while it's there, you still play it all day long. So,
amazing.
But Rare was, they took it. I mean, at this point, they took it massively seriously. There was nothing that was like left to chance, and I kind of feel like Tim and Chris's guiding hand over all of it. They just, I never knew them once to not be in agreement about anything, and just were just brilliant bosses. I just loved working for them. And no matter what I ever did, Tim would always go, "That's really good, Grant, but what about this?" And you go, "Oh, I never thought of that." And it's brilliant to have someone egg you on like that all the time, and it just makes you do better work in the end. So I love being there. It's like, for me, it's like Disneyland. It really was.
Yeah, Disneyland's a good. Yeah, you mentioned that earlier. I was going to bring that up. Yeah, it's a good. To imagine a workplace like Disneyland's pretty magical. No pun.
Yeah, it really was. I felt like, and also, for me, turning up there, never having a job, being on the unemployment for like 11 years, to have a job and it be good and get to write music and get paid. I mean, for God's sake, it's just for me, it was like incredible. I couldn't believe it. I thought
top of the world.
I thought I won the lottery. I couldn't believe it.
Yeah. So you mentioned the GoldenEye opportunity coming up, right? Where you're like you're working away on the Game Boy, which I'm kind of a Game Boy nerd, so that's exciting to me. I didn't anticipate that being a topic, but so maybe we can come back to that. But we definitely need to get to GoldenEye. So I mean, it sounds like it was kind of like, hey, Graham's pretty busy, so can you come help on this GoldenEye thing? And you're like, sure. And then, I mean, it turns out that's a pretty big move, I would assume, for you. I
was super eager, right? Though, like to get onto on the N64. I was really dying to do it. And also, besides that, I'm a massive Bond fan. So, people at my age, I guess at my age, I'm kind of a bit older than you, but I mean, it's a bit like, when I was a kid, you think back, the biggest movie of the year when it came out was a Bond movie, right? The biggest, best effects, best music, best everything, right? It was just fantastic.
And a favoured son of Scotland as well.
Absolutely, yeah, in those days. So, I mean, I feel like, to get to do that was amazing. And to know we could use Monty Norman's theme tune, and we were allowed to use that, which was fantastic, because I don't think all the Bond games have had that, I don't think. I feel like maybe some of the others didn't get it. We could use it how we wanted to do it. It was just up to us,
Yeah.
And I mean, we bought the bloody the double CD collection of all the pop songs that precede the movies up to that point, So I was going through all of those, stealing what I could, from all those great pop songs. I love the songs up in the Bond films, So I was thinking, again, I was going, oh my God, I can't believe I'm here, and I'm working on a Bond game, for God's sake. I couldn't believe it,
Yeah, I mean, it was you mentioned the music rights or just rights in general is interesting. We probably won't have time to get into the details, but it's an interesting game in that regard for various reasons. Being an IP, rights, whether it be music, there's the facial scan stuff, right. Which was also like a thing.
Yeah.
So it's really interesting case study in our industry for that kind of stuff. But it's awesome to hear that you're also a big fan. Of course you are, I guess. But coming in, I think Brett and I are also big fans of Bond in general. They hand it to you, and I guess Graham's still involved, and we're kind of looking at who wrote which pieces before the cast. Right. What was the approach? Like, how did you come up? How did you approach writing? Because as we all know, writing music for an IP that already has an established style, even a theme, but then you have to translate it to video games, which is a different medium than film. And then luckily you've composed for both. So you're a unique individual who can tell us about the differences. Brett and I are only really games people, so we don't, really know, but I have questions over here that I'm looking at. I had to ask sort of like composition for games is, in my opinion, a whole different thing. And so what was that process like as you were handed, okay, let's make a James Bond video game? Well, how do you start the music process for that?
Well, I think that, look, think about it now, like none of us on that team had made a game before. Like none of us had. So no one knew what they were doing. We all just did it by the seat of our pants, literally. And I think we should do this, and why not? No one knew if it was good or bad. No one knew it was going to work. And so equally the music, I was just like, well, I'm just going to write the Bond theme in as many different styles as I can think of,
Yeah.
And that was it. And I'm going to steal a bit from Faith No More and steal a bit from Duran Duran and stick it together, and that became the frigate theme, kind of thing. You just find stuff that you can stick together. I have no idea what I was doing. And I said to Martin Hollis, who's the game director, I said, look, how long does a music need to be? So he said, do about a minute each piece. I didn't know they were going to be the level for like, hours. So I made them longer. I made them 5 minutes longer, kind of thing. But I had no idea. I said, all right, he must know. I'll just do what he tells me, because he was the game director, and that was it, right? So, but he didn't know he was doing either. No one did. So, it was that thing where, the story about the multiplayer that Rare didn't want it, and now they did Nintendo. They developed it all the way along in secret and put it in at the end, right at the very end, and said, look, we've done this. What do you think of it? That wasn't even going to be in the game.
Yeah.
And that sold the game, if anything. That kind of college dorm, in America, playing in GoldenEye multiplayer was gigantic. I had no idea it was that big until I got here, really. So I think that I like it when people don't really know what they're doing, because I feel like you do things that it sounds right to you, and whatever, and it turns out all right in the end. I feel like sometimes when you get this big corporate thing these days, it's all focus tested and focus group tested, and everyone likes it a little bit, but no one loves it a lot. You get this kind of game by democracy game, by committee game that doesn't really please anybody a lot, but pleases a lot of people a little bit. I feel like that's the curse of the video game industry these days, I feel like. And I kind of like I do like the indie part, because you get those guys just going, I'm just going to do this. That's what it's going to be. I'm going to make a game about balloons, and off they go, and it can turn out great. So I do feel like back at Rare in those days, it was still a very indie company, even though, it was probably about 90 people, maybe when I was 18, 90, I think, when I was there. But it was still very indie. It was run by a family. There was not until Microsoft took it over, because Nintendo had a smaller share, so they couldn't dictate any policy. It was just with the family, right? So, you'd have a meeting in the morning, you'd do it by the afternoon, So I feel like once it became more corporate, that became less and less, So I just was, how can you not have fun with the James Bond theme? It's so fantastic. To get to play with that and write it and do it in different silly styles, like I did, or whatever, how can you not enjoy doing that as a musician? It's just the best.
Yeah, the indie spirit. I think that's a great point. And we, as you could imagine, we talk a lot about that on the podcast, because we're playing older games, right? In that time when game development was really starting to really become more of a dominant industry, and there were these still smallish companies that were masters of their own destiny, and were just doing what they thought was right. And GoldenEye is one of the infamous cases of, like, we know that no one really had made a game before, kind of thing, or a lot of people hadn't, and all that sort of stuff. So making it up as you go.
You also say, like, you were 90 people at the company, but you also had 6 or 8 games in development at once. So it's like any individual team wasn't huge, right? You had
I feel like 15 people.
10 or 15
per team.
Yeah. That's
crazy.
That's very indie spirit right there.
You couldn't do it now, could you?
Yeah, no, it's hard. It's hard to do it with small number these days.
Whole different ball game.
Whole different thing. A lot more middleware, thankfully.
Definitely. Yeah.
So you don't have to reinvent the wheel every time. But it does mean, like, as you were pointing out with the engines, that you're using something that is meant to cover a whole bunch of different things. And in a way, like you said, it does a lot of things a little bit well, instead of one thing really, really well, which is what the smaller focused teams, I think, tended to do. They built the engine that did their game, and then, as you said, they all had their own engines. There wasn't one engine for the whole team, and they just kind of cross-pollinated knowledge, which is an amazing kind of.
And I quite like that, because you just make the engine that works for your game, right? There's nothing superfluous. There's nothing in there you don't need.
Right.
You're not like using a reel or something, which is fantastic. But you just make the things that you need for your games. It's more compact. It runs quicker, because you're not got lots of fluff around it that you're just kind of ignoring. So. Even though it sounds like a bit of a daft idea, I think it does really work. If back you couldn't do it now, but I mean back then it really worked, because you could just make the things that you needed.
Yeah. It's also very Japanese ethos, right? I mean, that's a lot of in some ways Japan was behind the curve, as generations of hardware came along, because they had that sort of, like, you always just build the engine you need for your game.
Right.
You don't reuse a lot of code. It took them a long time to kind of embrace a more United States, industrial way of doing things, which is like, you're going to reuse these parts, so make them well, and you ended up with extraneous stuff. I've worked in some engines with a lot of extraneous stuff.
Yeah.
And that's definitely an East-West divide as well. So I can imagine the Nintendo fit very well with Rare in that respect.
Yeah, no, definitely. Well, I feel like, Tim and Chris about history of Nintendo. and they were well respected because they made great games on the NES and great games on the SNES. So there were a real good relationship there. And Joel Hochberg, who was a guy who ran a big arcade in Miami, he was kind of rare Miami, but they were just admin really. But he was a connection to Nintendo in the first place because he'd worked with them because he had a big arcade. So he got Tim and Chris introduced to Nintendo, showed them the reverse engineered NES game, and that kicked it all off. And Tim became good friends with Mr. Miyamoto and Chris as well. And so it was a very good relationship.
So when it comes to scoring a game with quite a few levels, and you look at the track list that you sent, and there's many minutes there and a lot of variety. I love that you kind of dropped in there Duran Duran and Faith No More.
You're right.
So I want to ask about influences and things like that apart from the IP itself. But and you mentioned Frigate a couple of times. I do think that is a great example of a memorable, different sounding score for a particular scenario because, it's like infiltrating a ship is like such a Bond/spy kind of thing. You want that feel to be there, right? And so you do want that score to be matching that. But was it very kind of loose when it comes to how both you and Graham kind of traded off on what you were doing? But then when it came to each of the levels, how did you approach okay, here's a frigate or here's, a missile silo or whatever? Was it just riffing and just kind of see what fits, or were you working with level design or, the game director or whatever to kind of figure out the themes of each of the, levels, or was it just kind of more instinctual, and kind of come as it comes?
I feel like I got a brief 2 or 3 sentence description of each level. That was what I got. That was it.
Wow.
And I don't think I saw anything really. And then I think Duncan Botwood gave me that, and then I just wrote what I thought would fit. If it was a creeping about level, it'd be quieter. If it was a full-on fight like a frigate, it'd be more animated. Louder music, more to it. Oh man! No one really guided me. I just did what I thought. And no one really. Everyone went, yeah, great. And that was it. So there's not a lot of feedback. And me and Graham worked on our own pieces. We didn't collaborate at all. So Graham had written some before I started. Then I took over. He wanted to do the blast core, and then I went to Banjo-Kazooie, and he came back. So I didn't finish GoldenEye. I got I think maybe I can't remember. It was some point in the next year, I think, or the year after. I can't remember. But and then he came back and finished it off. So that's why there's a mishmash of pieces. But we didn't work anything. We just did what we both thought. Graham was a big industrial kind of synth electronic music fan. I was a big metal fan. He had long hair and the full thing, So any excuse that I had to do something that was vaguely metal, was kind of what I did. So in the cradle at the end, it starts off with this piano riff going at the end. That was a metal riff for a metal band of my own years ago. Before that, I just thought that sounds good. Stuck it in there on the keyboard.
Oh man,
so
amazing.
You just did it that's on Spotify. That is on somewhere. And it's on YouTube. It's on my YouTube. I've got a YouTube channel I never use, but there's a track on there called Absolution, and that's you'll hear if you listen to it. There's a big drum solo at the start. We go straight to that riff. You'll recognize it from the cradle. But and I love the movie and all that, and it just like I say, I feel like any music, any video game, it's a bit like you can get a description, but you just got to shut your eyes and think, what's it going to sound like? How does that sound to you in your head? Like if someone says to me, it's a frozen ice castle, I'm thinking about what's spiky and icy in my head, like pizzicato strings and a glockenspiel and a celeste. They're spiky things that sound like ice in my head. Or it's a big warm forest, thinking about bassoons or strings that are warm and like a big forest. It's just you just shut your eyes and try to tell a story, right? So I don't think it's any more complicated than that. I feel like any composer worth the salt will be thinking like that. I feel like human beings are programmed to hear certain instruments at certain points and things they see. It'd be in movies or video games. I think it's the same. You just expect to hear stuff, You got the American Army there, you got the American Air Force coming across, you're going to hear some kind of Captain America type thing. It's that kind of Americana that you recognize,
Right.
So I feel like we're just all pre-programmed to hear certain things, before we even know what it's going to sound like. And I feel like composers are no different. So you just mess. Also, and I've got to say, I'm not a very intellectual composer. So I just like to mess around until I hear something that I like. I'll just load up a sample like a French horn or a clarinet or some kind of synth or whatever, mess around with the keyboard till I hear something that I like. And I like that chords. I like that bit of melody I've got. Work it a bit more, stick it together, and I just that's how I do it. I haven't got any kind of magic formula. I'm just very instinctual in what I do. I just feel like if it sounds good to me, maybe it'll sound good to somebody else. I don't know, but I mean, that's just the way I do it. Really. I don't really have any more thought behind it than just messing around till I hear something that I like.
That's great.
Well, I mean, that's great. I mean, it's an emotional connection that you're trying to get anyway, right? And so that it comes from that sort of emotional sense from you makes a lot of sense to me, right? I mean, it's not music is very mathematical, they say, but I don't hear math when I listen to music, right? I mean, what I hear is feeling, and definitely in games where you're trying to reinforce, like you said, the quiet of a stealthy level versus and that tension, right? And feeling that, and maybe like some heartbeat sounds in there because it's like,
totally.
You want to reflect that and have that emotional experience carried by the music. And that's the one that cuts right through to, the lizard brain, right? Is the audio.
Right.
So it's terrific. Yeah.
And also, you got to think people are on those levels for, hours on end sometimes. So, it's like listening to all that music over and over again. You have to kind of, Tim would say to us, you've got to write a tune that people can listen to a million times and just get the tits right. And you don't know how that's going to, you don't know if you achieve it until people play it later and say, I like that, or that really annoyed me. You don't know until that point, right? So, and also, I guess you guys are just, back in those days, no internet. So you had to wait for the magazines to review something. You didn't know. It didn't get killed overnight like it does these days, or exonerate or whatever, lauded overnight. It's when the embargo lifts, like in those days, it was like wait for the N64 magazine to come out, or Nintendo, whatever it was, Nintendo Power, or whatever, to let you know if it was good or bad, So
yeah.
And I feel like Rare, back in those days, it got quite a bit of a reputation for being a good game studio. So I feel like the Rare logo on a game would sell it almost without any reviews, as it went along, because Rare had a real sort of period of making really great games at that point.
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, I was to your point on the feeling and just sort of like getting. I love the idea of the simplicity of getting a sentence description of the levels and just kind of going with your gut on stuff. And I looked up the track list again, and it looks like you did the Statue Park.
I love that one. Yeah, that was that.
And
I love that one. Yeah.
That's the one I wanted to bring up for myself too, because you mentioned sneaky or whatever, and that's like at night. And I have some level design opinions about that level, but from a tone and music perspective, and just like Statue Park for a Bond game, let alone a spy game, Statue Park is kind of an iconic spy location in Russia anyway. And to me, being a Le Carre and et cetera, spy fan. And so it just had such a great feel to it. The mood of like, I felt like I was skulking around that park, and the music was a huge, huge part of that. So well done.
I mean, as you're entering that level, it really is as Tim was saying, some of the level design doesn't hold up like the more time you spend there because you start getting lost. But as you're entering it, the atmosphere of that park at night, with these big, landmarks as you're coming in I was like, that was the point in the game where I was like, oh wow, this is really cool. And part of that is the sonic experience.
I was trying to find, because John Barry wrote the music for a lot of the Bond movies in the early days, I mean, Monty Norman is credited with the theme tune, but that was a very litigious issue between Barry and Monty Norman. Monty Norman did write the that was his right. But when it goes to the that's complete John Barry. You can tell it's John Barry big band, right? But Monty Norman would never give it to me. He said, that's all mine, that's the way it went. But I mean, I was just trying to find those John Barry, because they've always got these crunchy, chords that you'd have in Bond movies that were just for that big vista that you'd look at. There's always a classic point in every movie where you get this kind of juicy chords over a big vista of some kind of beautiful Italian, like whatever it is, like that. And I was just trying to find some chords that I could just bung my hands on the keyboard and try and find something that wasn't like normal. That would try to be not saying I did it, but try to get some of that John Barry magic in there, because I feel like that area really needed it. I was so happy when I kind of found those intro chords on the French horns, my little sample, and I thought the atmosphere was. I was so pleased with myself. I thought I really found the right atmosphere for that level, and it's got that grandiose melody after the chords happen, and that would have been great if I had a live orchestra. It would have been awesome. It would have been great.
Yeah, but I mean that's not the only level I'd mentioned, but that one in particular, my kind of emotional memory of it, because we played it fairly recently, wouldn't have been anywhere near what it was without the music, right? We talk about that a lot in game development. Of course, it's like, how big audio in general is to the experience, and turning music on and off is an easy thing to try, right?
Yeah,
and how different the whole experience becomes when you don't have it, and and that one is all about, that level is all about atmosphere. So yeah, anyway, I wanted to mention that one in particular.
I'm glad you liked it.
Yeah. And we'll get to TikTok later, but because we have to talk about the pause music, otherwise we have people who will yell at us. So I mean, if you can be a little retrospective yourself, and maybe it's just instinct and emotion and kind of, like you said, the experimentation of it all. But this was early game for you. You went on to a great career, still going. What what do you look back? It's a cheesy question, but what do you look back on GoldenEye, right? What impact did it have on you? Do you carry anything with you from those days? I mean, it's an IP game, so there's some specific requirements that you thought like you mentioned Barry and stuff, right? Goals that you had, feelings that you wanted. But what did you bring with you since that you were handed this amazing James Bond opportunity?
I don't know. I just feel like it was right on my street. It was just absolute lightning in a bottle. I mean, I just love James Bond. I still to this day love James Bond. I think he's fantastic. And to get given that, and Graham to be, he could have kept doing it and just been, I could have done something else, But he said, I'm really busy on this. You need to take over. I was like, it's such a fortunate set of things that, you just, and I've got vivid memories of things like, I was there latest one night, maybe 8:30, something like that, and I remember in my chicken shed, and the door opened up, and in came Chris Stamper with like several Japanese guys. I didn't know who they were, and he just said, Grant, can you just play some music? And I thought, oh my God, I'm going to get fired any minute now. It's Mr. Arakawa. Like I didn't know, it's Mr. Arakawa. Like I had no idea who he was. But like, for God's sake, I just watched the Tetris movie last night. It's like, Mr. Arakawa, but like, and so I played some of the music, and and they went, oh yes, and they liked to wear. They kept saying they liked to wear taking the theme and did it in different styles, and I was just sat on my indie computer, like just plonking in tunes for them to play on, and off they went. I thought, and then the next day, Tim Stamper turns up with this young guy who I didn't know who he was, and I remember Tim sat on the floor, and this other guy sat in the chair, and I was like, my God, if the boss is sitting on the floor, who's this guy in the chair? Like, oh my God, I'm getting fired for definite, It was Greg Mayles, who was a lead designer on Donkey Kong Country, and then went to do Dream and Banjo, and Greg's been there forever,
Yeah.
I remember these committee tunes, please, and very straight face. You could see your tunes, please, Grant. So I played the tunes again. I think this is, I'm getting fired for definite. There's no way, And then
you had a great fear of getting fired, it sounds like.
Well, it just to have the Japanese guys the night before, then the other boss, and the morning after, I was like, I've done something completely wrong here. I don't know what I've done, but whatever it is, I'm out of it, And then he just said, look, we like your music. Could you maybe, we'd like you to come join us on Dream before Banjo-Kazooie? And I was like, I said, yeah, I'll be able to do that when I finish off GoldenEye. No, you're done with GoldenEye right now. Pack up your stuff, move into our stable. You're done. And that was it. It's all right. Just get packed up and go. There's no, because he's the boss, right? You just do what you said. So I remember that little episode super vividly, kind of thing. And also we got invited, because they all got invited down to when they were making GoldenEye, Pinewood Studios, is it in the UK? And before I started it, they all got invited down. They had one of the very first digital cameras, which is like this gigantic thing. They got taken through all the Bond memorabilia, like all the everything was incredible. So all the scenes from the movie were set up ready to go. We're clicking everywhere. All the costumes, they got shown everything at the Bond. It was just amazing for them. And then I guess halfway through what I was doing, they invited us down again because we're doing that because the game was so late, right? They were making the next one. I think it's The World Is Not Enough, is it? The one with Elliot Carver? Yeah, I think it's that one.
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, we got invited down again. And I was like, oh my God, I've got to see Bond get filmed. And, they were doing the scene where there's a bit where there's a Japanese lady and he's on the BMW bike and he's scooting on the ground. And he goes into the helicopter and he throws a rope into the helicopter and it gets tangled and it blows up. And that's a scene with someone filming it. And Peter's come across and said a couple of words about like Thomas to Brosnan, yeah. And like it's just fantastic, absolutely just spectacular. But equally, it kind of ruined the mystique of it because they were on the motorbike on its side. It was on a bit of a a pallet, they'll pull it along with a rope like that, and then he got up to throw the rope. It was a bit of not a very manly throw, and things like that. And the helicopter was just an empty shell they lowered in. No one was in it. There's no rotors on it at all. Just lowered it in. That was all put on CGI. So it kind of ruins the mystique of that a little bit. They got to look around. They saw that big tower. They jump out of. They grab the sign and rip down the tower, don't they? Out the skyscraper. So. And those things, you're never going to forget as long as you live, right? I mean, it was just spectacular to see it actually be there. And when they were filming that Bond scene, that I was right there. I could, just off, not in the camera, but and then for it to come out and for like GoldenEye to be that sleeper hit where it was super late. We all thought it was going to be an absolute disaster. It was full of bugs because it didn't have time to fix the bugs. So it just gone on so long, and it was a slow burner. So it something caught in that game, and it sold more in the second year than the first year. It sold more in the third year than the first 2 years put together. In the game, normally games go boom, and then it's like that, right? Like GoldenEye just kept going. It was just incredible. Like to sell more in the third year than the first 2 years put together was just ridiculous. So and also the equally Rare was a very kind of secretive place. No one did any interviews. There was none of that stuff on Tim McCree's show. Would say. We're not rock stars. We make games. The games to the talking. There's no point doing interviews. We just make great games. And that's all that matters.
Awesome.
And that was it. So it wasn't really till I guess I moved to America that I realized just quite how big it was. It was like, I absolutely, my time at Rare was just the best. Like I never, those 12, I was like nearly 13 years there. Like it's just spectacular.
That's a long run.
Like you weren't going to run into anybody in Twycross, and there's not enough people, right? I mean, so you really didn't have the exposure to know what you had there.
Amazing.
Yeah, and so of course, and you went literally from being a rock star to being, you're not a rock star. So there's also that. There's a little bit of irony there.
Well, I thought I'm a rock star. I had a go. But I mean, it was.
You played the theater to arenas of 70, 80, 90,000 people. You're a rock star. Sorry, it's
I wish.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
What a just a amazing convergence of things for you, Grant. To have to be where you're from and to be working on Bond and then to be working in games and then to have that kind of all kicked off in that way. I hadn't anticipated so many cool elements coming together for your story, and I'm really happy we had you on to talk about it.
It was absolute fluke, honestly. Considering that I was so bad at composition, I was terrible, really bad at it.
Yeah.
I mean, to get to, I don't know, from Robin to decide to do it. If he never decided to do it, I would never have decided to do it. It's all down to him, and I've always said to him, we're still mates to this day, even he's still there, doing Sea of Thieves. I'm going to see him in a week after next.
I'm a big Sea of Thieves fan, so tell him thank you. The music is incredible.
Yeah, he's Robin's a fantastic composer, and so for him to do that and then to suggest that perhaps I could have a go, and then I could think, well, I'll have a go, but if I last time to my name and bought a little bit of equipment that I could afford, and to get a job there, I'd sent 5 cassette tapes there over a year, got no reply. I just thought I'm used. I applied some other places, got nowhere. No one even give me a time of day, not an interview, nothing. And then to get that, just ridiculous.
Yeah,
wow.
That's
wild,
amazing. Yeah. So we have to talk about the pause music.
All right.
Afraid. We joked in pre-show.
We almost never get emails about the music. Like some people will say, like, you don't talk enough about the music. But I put in little bits of music before every episode. Just something from the game, something from the section we played or whatever. And literally after the first episode, I had 3 emails. You have to use the pause music before the game. Like literally, it was like I was like, yeah, like I had been playing it at first quietly. I just had forgotten to turn up the audio on my Switch, and I turned it up, and I was like, "Oh man, this stands out." I was like, I literally turned it up to hear the pause music. So yeah, you have a lot of fans out there for the pause music, not just amongst our listeners.
I mean, that thing is one of those things where a lot of times you do something in 20 minutes and don't think about it, and that was probably took me 20 minutes to write it, 15, 20 minutes, and just thought, I'm ready to write a pause tune. Just need plus. It's not a big deal. Just forget about it. That's done. And and then it's bizarre how the things you really try on people don't like, but the things you do in 10, 15 minutes, Everyone's like, oh my God, the pause music. I got called the godfather of trap music. I don't even know what trap music is. It's like, I still don't know what it is. And it's like, it's a bit like, it's one of those bizarre things where how weird it is that some things just get a life of their own. It's funny how you can never predict that. And like, it's been very humbling for me that people are still liking that pause music after 20 odd years of like, it's crazy. And equally the DK rap, as bad as it is, it's a bit like, I don't know. I mean, I feel like quite fortunate to have two things that are slightly viral. It's like, I can't believe that I managed to do it. So maybe that's the height of my fame. I don't know. But I mean, it's like one of those odd things that you never think about.
Yeah. I'm
sure you've done stuff yourselves that you've done in really quickly and thought, that's all. And then someone's really loved it, that thing you've done, because sometimes it's that, I hate the kind of phrase flow of consciousnly, but that just sometimes you just let it out. It just works great, right? I think that, the things you really concentrate on, you just can't get right and never any good. But the things you just go, that'll be fine. It's sometimes great.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes...
The thing with the pause music, of course, too, is that people do hear a lot of it, but not in a repetitive way. Like they hear it, a little bit in each level at different points when they're like, oh, what am I supposed to be doing here or whatever? And it's like, and it's just kind of in a way that pause music is their soundtrack for the game because it's consistent throughout the game. Like you have the theme, of course, everywhere, but instrumented in different ways. But literally the pause music is probably the thing they've heard the most. Yeah. But never in a point where it outstays its welcome because it's repeated, for an hour or whatever. You just hear, I hear a minute of it here. I hear a couple minutes of it later, and it becomes the backdrop to the game. And I think it lodges in the consciousness. It's also a banger, as pointed out. But yeah.
Well, yeah, I think it reminds me of the Diablo, fireside theme or town theme, right? Where it brings you, it's a moment of sort of ambience, if you will, that brings you into exactly what you're doing and reminds you that over and over again, right? And people hum it or whatever. And I know it was just a throwaway for you, but it's like, I think we all are surprised at how many of those happen and then kind of become a thing, right? And we've had a lot of great people interviews on the podcast, and I think you'd also be surprised at how many people say that, getting into the industry was a fluke. It was just like a thing of convergence of just kind of the right place at the right time, but also great talent, right? So I don't think you should, downplay yourself too much in that regard. But I do feel like that these days everyone's got a college to study. My son's about to go to UC Santa Cruz to study game design, right? And I mean, when I first went to Ray, I'm sure you guys are the same. No one had done anything remotely linked to college courses. But it was just like it was the guys that sat in the bedrooms working on spectrums for fun that ended up being the guys who could write assembler, who started off, back at, because they could write it, right? Because they did it for fun. It's not the most fun thing to do, but they thought it was, And I mean, it's that thing where, it's different now. I think you do have to do college courses and all the rest of it to get in the door, or at least make some fantastic demo you can show to someone and say, I can do this, give me a job, I feel like it's different now. And it is, like you say, I'm sure like 90% of the game industry back then was all fluke. No one knew they wanted to do it until they ended up doing it. It's like, I quite like this, who knew, So it's like, I think I'm sure that there's a billion of us, who are from back then that have all went, I wanted to be, I don't know, a truck driver. I end up working in games, somehow, Yeah, and I just think for the pause menu specifically, we had so many, and we have a couple colleagues that we talked about it too when they heard that you were going to be on. I mean, there's so many people that have. You mentioned the trajectory of the sales, and the surprise, weird last minute multiplayer edition. Everybody talks about their time as a kid or in college playing multiplayer.
Right.
And the nostalgia that comes with it, and there's obviously the campaign's wonderful too, but I think that to Brett's excellent point on like looking at your watch, being a thing that is sort of ever present when you've played that many hours of a game at that point in your life,
right? You
have people who have grown up making TikToks about it because they remember as a child, what is the thing that sticks in your mind, and it's a great song and it is a banger and all of that, but it's childhood for a lot of people, and we get so much response about that. It's like, oh man, I have spent so many hours playing this game and I remember this, and so.
No, I do feel like composers are lucky in some respects because, the game can age, but the music can still live on a little bit, I think, in games. And I also feel like something I realized, recently is that, when I was a kid, I feel like there's like a finite gap of like 8 till 14 or something like that age group where, you remember every TV show you watched, every theme tune you watched, all the lyrics like Scooby-Doo for me and Thunderbirds and Stingray and, all those things that Captain Scarlet and,
Stingray,
UFO.
oh my God.
Yeah, all those things. I can remember the theme tune to the day I die. And I feel like those little bits of that kind of finite age range, you never forget those things to the day you die. You just never do. And I just feel you've got to wait 20 years for people to remember it, But for me, especially.
That's what you did.
Yeah, no, but I feel like it is a real. I think all us human beings remember those vivid memories, forever. It's imprinted in your head. So if any of us, any of the games we've made or worked on, whatever, get to be in that little kind of age group, it's a massively humbling thing to think that anybody will remember something you did all those years ago and forever until they pass away. I think it's just what a unbelievable thing that we get to do something like that can imprint on someone's mind forever. It's just crazy.
Yeah, I heard Tim Schafer describe in the Psychonauts 2 documentary recently. He was like at the party for the ship, or whatever, and he said, "Congratulations, you made somebody's favorite game."
Yeah,
and it's like that. You made somebody's favorite, music in a game, and that's going to be with them forever. And we're lucky. It is humbling. I'm always humbled when I see somebody be a fan of our work. It's always just remarkable to me, and it feels like just a gift back. It's remarkably touching.
No, it really is. Even for our kids, like he'd be at school and he's wearing his GoldenEye t-shirt and someone will go, "Oh, do you even know what that is?" I said, "Well, actually, my dad wrote the music for it." They're like, "Oh my God." Some senior take the piss out of me, So, I feel like those moments are really, it's super special, I think for all of us, doing this kind of job that we do, that it is just an unbelievable gift that keeps on giving, providing, it's just I really can't quantify it. It's amazing.
Well, Grant, thank you so much for coming on. This was a pure delight.
One thing you do have to ask for, Tim. Now we've talked about the positives.
Of course.
We need a little bit of Donkey Kong, just a little, for the fans of the pod. We did have people write in about Donkey Kong, and we were talking with. I don't know if you knew Chris Woods back then.
Of course I did. Yeah, of course. I meant to say you must know Chris Woods. Yeah, of course.
Yeah, Chris works with us now, so right. It's.
Yeah, no, Chris very well. Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, so if we just a little maybe Donkey Kong, I'd love to hear it.
So I did the voice right, but it's pitched down, so you have to pitch it down.
Okay, I can do that. I have enough chops I can do
all
that.
Right. So I could do like it does like a okay. That's it does that, and he goes oh banana. It does that well.
Nice. I love it.
Yeah, you should try
I will do that. Amazing. Absolutely wonderful. Oh, thank you so much. This has been a great joy. Really, really, really appreciate it.
No, thanks for asking me. It's been great fun.
Welcome back from the break. I just want to say, oh, banana. Really well done as his, but good stuff. That was a fantastic interview. I really enjoyed that conversation.
Yeah, he seems like a great guy, and I mean, we always enjoy the journey, hearing about the journey for people, but I don't know, in this particular case, Grant's journey was quite something, and to have it come out with such great success and, like he said, surprise, right? They didn't know what they had, et cetera, but then, just a friend of ours sending us that TikTok just this week, it's like, wow, this is still relevant, in this crazy way. So we definitely, it was nice to have him kind of, I guess, we'll do one more episode after this, but if we're actually, that's what we're doing, right?
Yes, we're doing one more.
Just spoiled
Since
it. Surprise.
Well, last week we did multiplayer, but I was ill and we didn't record, so we still have to do that, and our takeaways, which we haven't done either. So we will return to that. I was thinking about it now afterwards. Of course, this spirit of the staircase, I should have asked about it, but it's like, the composition for games was like not a place that musicians went, right? I mean, it was I think especially with a lot of licensed titles in this era and things like that, people didn't see it probably as, a serious outlet for their composition. And like, so it's kind of unsurprising in some ways that it would be somebody who came from like a band culture and just, happened to have this band of friends, like literal other, sort of musical band to draw, to just draw from one another. So your entry into that community was like, you found one person who would take the risk and take the jump with you. And it turns out it had to be a guy who was on the dole. I mean, because the serious composers who are writing for the Royal Philharmonic or whatever, they were not going to go do this. Film was a thing they would do. But even that, like for years, in the early years of film was like was like low class, right? It was like not a thing you did. You went and wrote for serious, things, and games are like as far from serious as you could get for music. So it's also interesting, from that standpoint, where they had to draw the talent from.
Yeah.
And to take a guy who was in Manchester or whatever, no good bands ever came from there that I heard. And transplant them into Twycross, the town of 200 people or whatever it is also just kind of a like, what a fish out of water story that must have been at the time.
Yeah. Just like you said, Disneyland, or going to some crazy place that and I think I'm really also happy to have him come on to talk about his journey, his experience joining Rare as well, because of that era, and talking about, because again, we haven't played a Rare game yet. We haven't had anybody on from Rare, and it was just great to hear what it was like, and because it's such a unique experience compared to a lot of other places, and a bit of a legendary kind of, studio that its beginnings were also very unlike a lot of other things, even in an era of kind of indie feeling, development. So.
Yeah. I love the competitive aspect of that. I mean, there was a little bit of that at LucasArts, but there was so much more like moving between projects, and like you get people come, off of this project onto the other project. So there wasn't really ever like true siloing, and it feels like there was kind of more of that, and they were, competing. One of the things that, a lot of books about creativity will talk about, and especially like appropriately, like David Byrne talks about this in his book about how music is made and how music works. It might be called How Music Works. Great book, by the way, for people to read. But one of the things he talks about as being really, really important to the creation and development of music is a scene, like a literal scene where this is taking place. And he's talking about, for him, CBGB or whatever in the New York and like all that stuff, the Velvet Underground, etc. But, for games, Rare was kind of had created a similar sort of vibe, and, people talk about in technology, like Silicon Valley is where it's at. But, at the same time, Massachusetts had Route 128, and they were like, it was going to be the Silicon Valley of the East. But they didn't have a scene because they were so NDA, East Coast obsessive, like you can't talk about what you do, that they didn't develop a scene because the technologists weren't talking together. So when you have this kind of like one-upmanship, oh, I can do this effect with this machine, can you do better than that? Or can you add to this music I've done, is how that stuff elevates, right? It's because everybody's fighting to get a little bit better. I feel like we heard that in another interview, and I'll have to think, I feel like that has come up before. So I'm not surprised to hear it again, but it's also just like, oh yeah, that's how some of this works. It's like you see your colleagues doing really cool stuff, and you want to do better. You want to I think we talked maybe with level design with like, oh God, it's
well, it rings a bell
there. Yeah.
But I'm definitely not going to remember.
Yeah, I know. It's, I don't know. I feel like it wasn't Doom though. I was like, was it like Doom? Anyway, it'll come to me eventually. Maybe it was Dark Forces.
Yeah, maybe it could have been.
Yeah. Anyway, I'll have to like think back and try to figure out.
I'm sure a listener will remember.
Yeah, somebody will remember somebody who's listened to the interviews more recently. But yeah, a fantastic, absolutely fantastic interview. I'm so glad we were able to talk with him.
And thanks to Neil Harrison, who's a friend of mine that got us connected to Grant, who was also back in Rare in the old days. So
yeah,
thanks, Neil. It's a good connection. And the story about his son wearing that GoldenEye shirt cracked me up.
That is so good.
It's like so retro, right? It's like
you don't know anything about that game, do you? Come on,
Well, you're just a poser. You're just a Gen Z poser. Yeah.
You're just trying to get the street cred. Anyway, let me find my outro stuff because of course I still have to do that. We're not doing any email this week because we generally like to let the interview stand alone, but we will get to them. We have a bunch. We might end up having to do another mailbag soon. Actually, we've got quite a lot. The Nintendo games always bring those out, but keep sending them to devgameclub@gmail.com. We also love your reviews and all of that. If we see them, we'd like to read them on the air. If we don't read yours, we may not have seen it, so just ping us, let us know where it is in whatever platform you use. You can find us on the web at devgameclub.com or on Twitter at devgameclub, where you can also sporadically find my co-host at
Tim Longwood Jr. with the JR at the end.
And also use sometimes Twitch. It's been a specific number of hours that somebody in the Discord I'm sure knows since your last stream.
Years.
But, it adds up. But someday you'll get back to that. And of course, as I just mentioned, we have a Discord. You can ping me. I've been putting it in the show notes now, and so there should be a link in there. And this is, of course, my reminder to myself to do that. Our intro and outro music was written and performed by Kirk Hamilton, commissioned by friendly cast Aaron Evers, and our logo is by Mark Garcia, as well as our merch store, and of course the setup of that and a lot of the administration of that Discord, and many, many emotes. Have fun getting slap happy this week, and good night.
Good night.